Hello and welcome to episode 45 of the Barndoor restoration. Last episode I got started on the front, made up some drawings of the parts, and I got the outer panels roughed in. So this episode, a few more pieces made up and some more details added to this outer piece. So it's getting pretty close to ready to weld in. Last episode I covered most of the details of these panels. There's a few things I left out. The front harness comes up through this hole. And to protect the harness, they rolled the edge of the hole up. So they rolled it up so that the harness is against the side of the metal instead of the edge of the metal. I was lucky enough to have the original piece for here, so I was able to copy that raised lip. The spot welds. I spot welded the reinforcement panel on the center panel. And trying to figure out how they originally spot welded. There's not a science to it. They're all different. Now, I didn't have any of this left on mine. It was all gone, or 90% of it was gone. So I couldn't really tell how it was spot welded. So something like that, I look at photos of buses with original metal. And sometimes you can see where the spot welds are. Also, new old stock panels. I did see a picture of one of those, and it showed the spot welds. And another floor that was removed from a bus that still had this area in it. And they're all different, but generally it seems like they had two lines of spot welds, two short lines each side the shifter area, and then four on the raised shifter area, and a few front and back across them. And they all seem to kind of have that kind of layout. So that's what I went with. I figured this is probably what they originally were trying for, and it was just whoever's welding it that day, however they wanted to, that's how it got welded at the factory. So a lot of these things like putting spot welds back to look factory, it's not like you're measuring positions. You're just trying to make it look like it was when that was done at the factory. Now this episode I got these two panels mostly done. So I started with the center panel. So that's two pieces. There's the center panel, it's almost square, and then the reinforcement panel that goes in behind. And you will notice that there's a notch in this side, and the reinforcement panel, oops, got it backwards, hangs out past. And it has two bolt holes in it. And that's so the pedal panel sets down in flush. So it uses that thickness of metal there to set in. They also have a bulge here for the shifting lever, and I needed that to be exact. So I 3D printed dies. I've been using that quite a bit. I have good success. I was concerned about this because it's 18 gauge and it's relatively shallow. Oops. So I was a little concerned I wasn't going to get a real sharp definition of the with it, but it worked out great. So, and as usual, I use alignment pins. And on these, I lined them up so with the center of the holes that are there. So I just drilled 1/8 holes through the panel so the alignment pins, I could push this up, the pins through the panel, set the top one on, and then that ensures nothing can move. Put it in the press, give it a press, probably about 10 tons. And they come out great. A really nice press, nice and sharp, well defined. So both parts gets the same pressing, the reinforcement panel and the top, and they just slide together and spot weld on after. So once I had the pressing done, I did the ribs. I covered the ribs in the last episode when I did these. So same thing. The only thing is the ribs on these panels, the ends, terminations kind of gradually slope up. These are sharp all the way around, and these ones here kind of slope a bit. So I just, the male part of the die, I just ground the ends down a little bit, give them a little curve. So it gives them so now they match up a little better with the originals. So these ribs are all the same length, so it was really quick to just press them in. And I do is I press one, and then I measure past the next one, press it, and then over press it. That way I make up for any shrinkage in the metal. You don't get too much shrinkage with it, but it does deform it a bit. And I always cut these panels a little large to make up for any shrinkage when pressing this and anything that deforms. It's easier to do that and then trim them for size after. The other thing I did was the pedal panel was still in decent shape on this. Well, meaning most of the bolt holes were still in the correct position. And I wanted to make sure an original one would fit here perfectly. So I put it in and bolted it, make sure everything was going to line up. Now I thought it would because I did the drawings originally, but I actually ended up taking about 1 millimeter off this side of the panel to make it fit properly. So it was pretty close, but that's just an extra reassurance that everything's going to be perfect when I get it done. So after that was all shaped, I spot welded them together, and that's relatively easy. Before I spot weld them together, the reinforcement panel has a nut welded on the back, T-nut welded on for the footrest, and then the two panels get spot welded together. And I also put zinc between the two, so it has the protection. After that, the front panel. So front panel, long and thin. All the ribs are different lengths, so I had to every time I stamp one, I'd have to shorten my dies just a little bit, stamp next, shorten a little bit, and then do them in the order from longest to shortest. So that was a bit of a pain, but it came out all right. You'll notice if you keep watching the video of me doing the work on it, it warped really badly. I'm not sure why this one warped so much more than the other ones, but it was quite a bit. So I had to use a hammer and dolly to get it roughly flat, and then shrink these edges. I had to shrink them a lot to get it really flat again. I mean, it's still got a little bulge, but that'll spot well down there very easily. So after I got it worked out pretty flat again, there is a step on this one. Same as these end panels have the step here. This one has a step across. Now the issue with this step is very close to the end of these ribs. And my stepping die I use for the bead roller would roll over the end of the ribs and crush them. But I hate doing these steps by hand because it's very hard to get them straight. I did the ones on the bulkhead, but they're curved and relatively short, so it wasn't that big a deal. But doing this straight one would be a pain to get it looking perfect. And this is a spot that's really going to show. So what I did, I took the die, the lower die on the bead roller, and I beveled the edges of it so that it would clear by the ribs. And it just barely touches them on the way by, but it made the step just as good as I did with the full die. So I'm happy with how that came out. Now there is a little detail here. This step goes along, but where the bolt is for the footrest, the step actually comes in around that bolt. So it curves in around. So I put the step in, and then I pressed this, kind of pressed this in. I took another piece of 18 gauge. I cut a hole the size of that bulge from the bottom side. And I put it in and clamped it. So it basically cut the hole off halfway, so it was like half a plate in there, button up against the step. And then I put it in the press with a socket the size of the inner size of that indent, and pressed it. And then when it had the pressure on it, I went around with the hammer and just kind of dollied that, or hammered it flat. And that came out really good, except I used too much force on the press, and the socket cut into the metal quite a bit. I was able to work that out. Basically just hammer dolly the metal, kind of smooth it back out again. Probably shouldn't have used quite so much pressure. It did come out looking original, so I'm happy with that. The hole for the wiring harness, that lipped edge on it, I did something like that before on the I-beams on the cargo floor. They have a plate where the shifting rod goes through them, kind of a reinforcement plate that has this type of raised edge on it. And when I did that, I used 2 plates. A plate with a hole the size of the ID of this, and a plate with a hole, the OD of the metal. And basically clamp the piece of metal in, drive a socket down through, and it made a perfect form. Worked very well. On this I got a little lazy, and I thought, well, I had a piece of pipe with a ID the same size as this outer piece, and I found a socket that was exactly the size of the inside. And I thought, well, I'll just put the pipe in the vise, set the panel on it, and drive the socket down through. The problem with that is it doesn't just roll the metal in, it rolls everything up too. So you end up kind of a bulge in the panel, kind of almost like a funnel shape. So what I ended up doing was I take a socket in here and I clamped the socket to the back of the vise, and then used a chisel and I just kind of drove that down in flat. It worked. Come out actually quite nice. I'm quite happy with it. But it probably would have been easier if I had made a couple pieces of plate and clamped them like I did the rear. So there's a few other little holes in this. This hole here is actually for the brake lights. The wire drops down through here and goes back to the master cylinder switch, and then it goes over and down to there's a single brake light in the back of the center of the truck. And then this hole here is for greasing the steering arms. And then you have the notches here for the pedals. So there's a little notch in here, a little more here. This is for the gas pedal, brake pedal. Steering column comes up through. These are slotted. And there's a panel that goes over this. So I got those all fitted up. I still have the hole here for the heating duct comes up through. That's a weird shape, but I do have it on the pattern. Here I have the shape of it there, so I'm going to have to just transfer that on and cut that out. So other than that, this is getting pretty close. Oh, another thing I did from last episode is I added the bulge for the dimmer switch. So the dimmer switch sets in here on an angle. I hadn't done that before because I was waiting to see how this pressed, how the metal was going to press, because I wasn't sure the die was going to work there. So once that worked so well, I decided, okay, well, I'm going to try a die for the dimmer switch. So I did the same thing, set in here. So 2 alignment holes. I had to use a slightly smaller drill because these holes couldn't be as big because they have self-tappers go in them. So I used a slightly smaller drill bit for alignment pins on that. So one from underneath, one on top, and pressed them. And of course I did a sample first. I always do a sample first because I didn't want to ruin my panel. And it seemed to work out quite well. Now, because this is so close to that rib, I actually have a piece of the rib in the die, so it actually sets in there into that rib and against this rib. And then this side here is angled to go against that. It worked well. The shape is perfect. It warped it a lot, so I had quite a bit of work to try and get this warped out. Before I pressed it, there was too much metal here. It was bulged. After pressing it, it sucked it in and left too much around the outside. I had to heat shrink in here a little bit because it left too much metal there. And then do a lot of shrinking along this side with the shrinker. But it did come out great. I also added the hole. This hole here is for the speedometer cable. It goes down through along the frame. The speedometer cable on these goes to out through the spindle, and then the cap, the bearing cap on the front wheel, has a square hole in it, and the speedometer cable comes out through that and has a clip on it. So it takes the speed off the front wheel. Anyway, the cable comes up through this hole. And this hole is for the horn. So the harness comes down and comes through the kick panel with the 3 wires for the dimmer switch go here. But then the horn wire drops off, goes down this hole to the horns, which are mounted under, right about here underneath. And the horn gets its ground from the bottom of the steering box, comes out and goes over to it. Well, that about covers everything for this episode. Next episode, I want to get all these panels welded in. So they have to be welded together and then put in place and then welded into in position. And of course this panel just gets bolted in. I may not have this panel here finished, but it doesn't really matter because this old one will be used as to hold everything in when I weld it. Drawings. I haven't uploaded any drawings for this to GrabCAD yet. I'm going to wait until next episode just to ensure there's no other little details that need to be fixed. I did find a couple minor things I had to change. So thanks for the comments. I really appreciate them. And thanks for watching.